strikes you that the same man who was the beneficiary during the GOP primaries of over $2 billion of free media should be the same man who is bitching and moaning about press coverage now that he's in the general campaign? Congratulations, you are most perceptive. Almost as perceptive as myself and Ian Tuttle at nationalreview.com this morning. Because Trump is definitely the wrong man to attack the media. It makes you wonder. You know what? When we call Trump stupid, and maybe most of that is pejorative, but it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder: can Trump really be this obtuse? Did he really not think that, just like with every other Republican candidate, the media wasn't going to turn on him? The media does this every 4 years. Every 4 years, the media tries to impose their choice for Republican nominee upon the GOP. In other words, the weakest general election candidate against the Democrat. They do it every single solitary cycle. And this is no different. In fact, they hit the jackpot with Donald Trump. Why do you think they gave him $2 billion worth of free media in the first place? But just like with every Republican candidate, every Republican nominee, once the nomination is in hand, they turn on him like they turn on a dime, and it becomes the bleep storm of all time until the next presidential election. And that's what's happened with Trump here. I mean, it's just not a difficult thing to figure out, folks. But Trump, I guess his ego just renders him stupid. Because, and for all you Trump supporters out there, you're not excused from this stupidity conclusion. You wanted Trump. One of the reasons you wanted Trump was that he knew the media. He knew how to use the media, shape the media, manipulate the media. Finally, we're going to control the media. How's that working out for you? You wanted to take a shortcut, and like I always say, shortcuts aren't. We don't get to do like the Democrats do, and we don't get to use celebrity. We don't get to use shortcuts. We can't use the Democrats' tactics against them. It doesn't work that way. The media sees to that. We have to be better. Republicans have to be better. Republicans have no margin for error. Republicans cannot make mistakes. Republicans can't send out Senate candidates talking about justifiable rape. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. You can't send a candidate out there talking about binders full of women. Now, sure, that was silly. We know what Mitt Romney meant, but you can't make those mistakes if you're a Republican. You have to be perfect, errorless. You have to be the ultimate in a disciplined, on message, got all the ducks in a row, know what you're doing, always on presidential candidate. Does any of that sound like Donald Trump, including the label Republican? No, it does not. Now, here's a quote. Here's of a recent bout of whining. In fact, it was just two days ago. The most pathetic whining and bitching and moaning that you have ever. I mean, is this what a? Let me listen to this quote and then tell me if this is what an alpha male says and does. Here's the quote. If the disgusting and corrupt media covered me honestly and didn't put false meaning into the words I say, I would be beating Hillary by 20%. My rallies are not covered properly by the media. They never discuss the real message and never show crowd size or enthusiasm. I'm not only fighting crooked Hillary, I'm fighting the dishonest and corrupt media. Is that what an alpha male says and does? ladies and gentlemen. How about manning up? Like in a recent video the other day, Leon Hunt said this, man up. Put on your big boy pants. Hey, you wanted to be president. You wanted to run for president. You ran for the Republican nomination. You got the Republican nomination. Now, this is the big leagues. You are the Republican presidential nominee. Guess what? This is what happens to Republican presidential nominees every 4 years. And what's Trump's reaction? I'm going to hold my breath until you start feeling better. Alpha male. By the way, have you noticed Trump doesn't talk about the polls much anymore, other than to complain about them? In the primaries, it was all. I mean, every other word was, "I'm ahead in the polls. Did you know I'm leading in the polls? By the way, I'm leading in the polls. You might have forgotten that. Did you know I was leading in the polls?" Doesn't talk about that much anymore. Apparently, the Republican presidential nominee has just discovered that the media is biased. Well, who could blame him? I mean, after all, he and the media, especially the television media, have had a mutually beneficial relationship for much of this election season, i.e. the primary election season, the nominating contest. As the New York Times wrote this spring, Trump was the recipient of the equivalent of $1.9 billion in free media between the announcement of his candidacy in June 2015 on through March of this past spring. In February, he didn't earn it, he received $400 million in free media, as the Times notes, about what John McCain spent on his entire 2008 presidential campaign. Meanwhile, Trump spent $10 million on ads. $10 million. While I was in his office couch at Trump Tower, right? John McCain spent $400 million on his entire 2008 presidential campaign and fell 7 percentage points short in the electoral vote. Donald Trump has received to date, I believe it's about $2.5 billion in free media coverage, and he's further behind Hillary Clinton. He's further behind Hillary Clinton than John McCain was of Barack Obama, which is generally considered to have been as close as a landslide as you're going to get in this polarized era. Donald Trump will have received 6 times or more as much free media coverage as John McCain had to earn, and he's going to lose by a bigger margin. Good job, Trumplicans. Or put it in hours. Trump has been the subject of the clear majority, 62%, of candidate-focused TV coverage of the Republican race, wrote 538.com back in March. And CNN, which Trump has now nicknamed the Clinton News Network, well, gee, that's original. Yeah, we were using that one back in the 90s. At least come up with original material. CNN mentioned a Republican presidential candidate during the primary season, or when CNN mentioned a Republican presidential candidate during the primary season, 55% of the time it was Trump. Second was Marco Rubio with a measly 10.2%. You beginning to wonder or figure out, are you still wondering why Donald Trump got the GOP nomination? Because the media wanted him to be the Republican nominee. Why do you think that is? You want your answer? Look at the polls. It was a commonplace during the primary season for networks to cut away from a speech by another candidate in favor of an empty Trump campaign podium. Jesus. This really is not difficult to figure out, Trumplicans. It really isn't. During that time, Trump had plenty of complaints about certain individuals in the media. In other words, those who weren't unzipping his fly. Bill Kristol, Jonah Goldberg, Joe Scarborough, on whichever days he wasn't kissing Trump's ass. But Trump was more or less happy to ride a tsunami of fascinated coverage to the Republican nomination. Meanwhile, the Times again, primetime advertising rates spiked at the major cable news networks in the first quarter of the year, rising 45% at CNN and 23% at MSNBC, compared with the same period the year before, according to Kantar Media, which tracks ad spending. In other words, it was a win-win. Trump meant ratings, and Trump meant the weakest possible opponent for Hillary Clinton. Win-win. And for true conservatives, lose-lose, which made it win-win-win for the media, right? Of course, the stakes have changed. Watching Donald Trump Hulk smash the Republican Party was amusing for National Press Club types, but the prospect of his doing the same to the federal government is less so. Not that he would have done that. He would have grown it just like any other Democrat. The result is a whiplash-inducing, if entirely unsurprising, about-face. In July, Hillary Clinton nearly caught up to Trump in free U.S. media. 533 million to 513 million. Told you so, Trumplicans. We told you so. Out-and-out media bias is obviously on display, as it always is, as it has been since before I was born, 52 years ago. While the press has reached for smelling salts over Trump's "Obama is the founder of ISIS" gaffe, it studiously ignored Hillary Clinton's calling Trump the recruiting sergeant for ISIS, or claiming in December, falsely, that the terrorist organization was using him in recruiting videos. Likewise, during the dispute last autumn over whether or not to take Syrian refugees, Barack Obama suggested that he couldn't think of a more potent recruitment tool for ISIS than some of the rhetoric that's been coming out of here during the course of this debate. Read, "Evil Republicans!" And in June, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren tweeted that the Senate GOP have decided to sell weapons to ISIS. I have no idea what she's talking about. Meanwhile, the bombshell revelation that the Commissariat of Injustice, Revenge, and Cover-Up refused to pursue the FBI's request for an investigation into the relationship between the Clinton Foundation and Hillary Clinton's state commissariat was buried in paragraph 26 of a CNN report. So what else is new? That's why I never bitch much about media bias, because A, we can't change it, and B, consequently, it's part of the environment. You know, it's like really wanting to be able to fly, but bitching and moaning about gravity. Can you change gravity? No, you cannot. So you have to figure out a way around it. The Wright brothers did that 113 years ago, in case you skipped remedial history class. But I mean, you get the point. The media is biased against the right. It has a left-wing bias. It always will have a left-wing bias. We can't change it, so we got to overcome it. And it can be overcome. Republicans do win elections in this country. It's not impossible. So that's just simply that's part of the environment. That's part of the game. You know, it's. I mean, sure, point it out, keep pointing it out, but you know, getting so angry about it is kind of pointless. In fact, that displays weakness in and of itself. You have any idea, Trumplicans, how weak your candidate looks when he's bitching and moaning and complaining about the media? Again, man up. Be that alpha male that your candidate held himself out as being. Tell him to put on his big boy pants. This is what being the Republican presidential nominee means. However, Trump's media coverage is obviously also due to his late-stage case of foot and mouth disease, or rectal cranial impaction, if you will, compounded by his extraordinary penchant for dousing campaign fires with diesel fuel, or napalm, whichever. In the last month, Trump has engaged in a week-long spat with the parents of a fallen American soldier. He joked about the potential assassination of his opponent, and he made his comment about Obama and ISIS a several-day ordeal by claiming he meant it literally. No, sarcastically. No, literally, sarcastically, metaphorically. As is so often the case with Trump, he's not entirely right, and he's not entirely wrong. There is rank media bias. There's also legitimate media criticism of a public figure. But as is also the case with Trump, and uniquely with him, the line has become impossible to distinguish because it has been absorbed into Trump's personal pathologies. In other words, his cult followers parrot everything he says, which doesn't do much for their credibility or reputations. The dishonest and corrupt media are dishonest and corrupt not just because they engage in bias, that's a big part of it, but also because they are not favorable to Donald Trump in Trump's eyes. In other words, Trump is claiming, in essence, what Trump is saying is that the media has betrayed him, and he's actually surprised by it. Your candidate, Trumplicans, not ours. That's why Trump has banned or threatened to ban the Washington Post, Univision, BuzzFeed, Politico, the Des Moines Register, and the New York Times' Maggie Haberman. It's also why he's threatened to open up our libel law so that he can prosecute journalists who write horrible articles about him in blatant evisceration of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The disgusting media apparently now include the Federalists' Mary Catherine Ham, she's conservative, by the way, folks, about whom Trump recently said, "I don't know her, but she always says bad things." That's not a critique of genuine media bias. That's not even a critique of what Hugh Hewitt calls the legacy media. Because Mary Catherine Ham is not only a conservative journalist and commentator, she's never Trump. So that's not a critique of genuine media bias. That's thin-skinned Trump being upset that a reporter fails to prostrate herself before him, on her knees unzipping his fly, metaphorically. Although with Trump, you never know. It's a good thing that Ann Coulter and Laura Ingraham are beyond their childbearing years. They might have some interesting, or there may be some interesting stories about them in the near future. But I digress. Among the many toxins that the conservative movement and the Republican Party will have to expel after November 8th is the confusion of, and trust me, Trumplicans, we never Trumpers will be bringing we will deploy Roto-Rooter, we will be deploying the sump pumps, the bulldozers, the backhoes, to bury the Trump mentality so far down that even the worms can't find it. But among the many toxins aforementioned to be expelled after November 8th is the confusion of Trump's world-consuming narcissism with legitimate criticisms of institutions that deserve to be held accountable. This is another example of how Trump has lain waste to the conservative movement. Destroyed our brand. Certainly the GOP's. Because trying to rebuild the GOP after the Trump debacle, every step of the way, the retort from the left is going to be, well, you nominated Trump. You will never live this. Do you understand? Anybody who was planning on voting for Donald Trump, do you understand, do you realize you will never live that down? You will never live it down. You will never be able to get away from it. You will never get his stink off of you. It's going to cripple the Republican Party for cycles, years, maybe even decades to come. And the only reason I say decades is that how much mileage did the Democrats get out of Herbert Hoover? The only saving grace for the GOP may be the short attention span of the American public in the early 21st century. That may be it. That may be the only saving grace. Oh, Trump! That was 2016. Well, that's ages ago. You better hope that's the case. And the only way that can happen is if people don't try to keep Trumpism going. And the good thing, the optimistic thing with that is that it is, like with all fascist manifestations, the movement is really wrapped up in the cult of personality of its leader. And once that leader is gone, the movement kind of goes. So the very superficiality of your candidate and his very unseriousness may be the only way that the GOP survives. Which is its own little bit of poetic justice. For all the Sturm und Drang and the roar of Trump mania, it will just be like any other fad. In the rearview mirror, forgotten, and most deservedly so. A study published last year in the journal Big Data and Society examined more than 130,000 news articles about the 2012 presidential election produced by more than 700 American and international outlets, and found that overall media reporting contained more frequently positive statements about the Democrats than the Republicans. Shocker. Overall, the Republicans were more frequently the object of negative statements. Gee, you think? I mean, that's not surprising, and balancing that coverage is long overdue. But Trump's attacks on media bias, which will continue to be diligently parroted by his supporters, his witless idiot supporters. I mean, he loved media bias as long as it worked in his favor. Now it's not working in his favor, is it? Those attacks have made the task of holding the media accountable much more difficult by incorporating under the header of media bias everything that displeases Donald Trump. Disentangling real institutional problems from Trump's self-obsession will be among the most difficult tasks facing post-Trump conservatives. Again, this is what is the epitome of the damage that Trump has done to what used to be our cause, and now is only never Trump's cause because Trumplicans have sold out to the National Socialists. Republican voters thought they were nominating the one candidate who could face down the liberal media. It turns out that they picked the one candidate most uniquely vulnerable to them.